I'm going to be installing some TorkLift lower overloads on the rear axle of the truck here. A couple of challenges with this. One is I've got a camper on the truck. I'll figure that out later. Number two is I've got a really tiny garage, so I have to do this outside. But let me show you a little bit about what the overloads do and what my plans are here. A leaf spring has a main spring pack, which is what you see here. And in this case, it has an upper overload and a lower overload. And basically what happens is when the truck sags in the back, when you add into the weight, it'll sag to the point where these will engage and you'll get more spring capacity, and it'll flatten this lower leaf pack to the point where these compress up against the leaf springs, and again, adding more spring capacity. But what happens in my case is I inflate the airbags to re-level the truck, and then it lifts the mainspring pack off of those lower overload springs. And that, in fact, then puts the weight on the airbags. And I think with 80 PSI on those airbags, they're kind of bouncy. They're like a big bouncy ball. And so it would be nice to get some of that weight back on these overload springs when the camper's on. So to do that, I'm going to install these Stableload lower overloads. They're basically wedges that go in between here that will engage this lower overload spring before the truck starts to sag, and they're on a pivot so they can pivot out of the way. So when you don't need them, you can pivot them out of the way, and they keep the truck suspension from being too stiff and being very rough and jarring. And it's already jarring enough from the factory. Don't want to make that worse if I don't have to. And here's what came to me as the complete kit. I've already opened this up. It was packaged better than this beforehand. Everything was kind of wrapped in little kits with this craft paper here. You get a bag of hardware, your nuts and bolts, washers, pins, those types of things. And you get 4 sets of wedge packs and a base plate. Basically, you get 2 that are each a mirrored image of each other. And you have the wedge packs that can stack up here, and we'll go over that later, and then a base plate that is bolted to the leaf springs and then holds these packs. And the gist of this is that these packs can sit here and they can pivot in and out from in between the leaf springs. So to mount this, I have to assemble this as a kit. There's some proper spacing to be done, a hinge pin or bolt to put in, some washers to space these, like I say, space these right so they can pivot over the top of the leaf spring, the overload spring. And then I have to drill a hole in my overload leaf spring. Some trucks come with that hole pre-drilled with a rubber bubber mounted in it. Mine does not, so I will have to drill that hole and then go ahead and mount all of this into place. To drill the hole, they do send 2 of these drill bits. They're 7/16 cobalt hardened drill bits because that spring material is hardened and is a very tough material to drill, and you have to be very careful about how you do that. I'll talk about that more shortly. Okay, so I have extended these jacks now, and basically taken the weight of the truck bed off, causing the truck bed to raise up, whereas before this was compressed completely against the spring there. Now there's a nice gap, and it's also being lifted by the airbags, which have about 80 PSI in them. So with no load, this thing wants to lift up pretty good. So the next thing to do is to start the install. And the first thing I have to do on the install is drill these holes. So those supports mount right here, so you have to go about 1 inch back and drill that hole right up through here. So the idea is good, hard, firm push pressure on this thing. Keep it lubricated every 5-10 seconds. Add some lubrication and just keep on working through until it dimples here on the backside. To lubricate it, I have some, basically a can here, but I've got some used motor oil in it. I changed the oil not too long ago, so I can periodically dip this drill bit into the motor oil. That did not go well at all. I struggled and struggled. I thought it was going to be a 1-hour job to drill these 4 holes in the leaf springs. 5 hours later, I drilled 1 3/4 of a hole and ruined a drill in the process. You're supposed to put oil on these things to lube them as you're drilling, but you're drilling upside down and you're spraying up into the hole. Not a whole lot of oil gets in there, and a lot of it runs down onto the drill, which is not good for the drill. It was getting inside the chuck. I was using the method where I would take a bottle jack and jack up against the back of the drill to provide a good force. I couldn't provide enough force with my hands. I don't think I could even if it was on a lift. So I used the bottle jack, and that worked pretty well, but that drill just wasn't up to the task. I think, that much force against the back of the drill was pushing hard against the bearings in there. The drill was getting really hot. Put all of those things together, it's just a recipe for disaster, as I learned the hard way. So what have I done? Well, first thing I did was I tried to find somebody local who could drill them for me. Almost half the way there, seemed like maybe somebody could do it. Called around, called everything from fab shops to 4-wheel drive fabricators, called a leaf spring or spring and suspension shop, and all of them either said they couldn't do it, or it would be a month and a half, 2 months till they could get me in. The leaf springs shop said they would have to pull the springs and put them on their press to be able to do that. Not really an option. So after all that, I picked up the phone and I called TorkLift and I ordered their drill assist tool. It took probably 3 weeks to get it from the time I first started calling. They had a little bit of difficulty delivering it, but I was not in a rush, so it showed up, and here it is. So I basically ruined this drill. This is a Makita XFD 10, a great drill, used it around the house, had what I thought was a lot of torque, certainly for most household remodeling projects, even some pretty big drilling, never had a problem with it. But you can see the damage that was done when I pushing on it with the back of the jack. That's even with a wood block between the jack and the drill. It got very hot at one point and started smoking. It has, you can see, a plastic chuck, and oil was getting down in there. I'm not sure if it was getting down into the motor. Wouldn't surprise me. So I had to replace this, and I decided to upgrade in the process. And so I went with this Makita XPH 14. You can put an external handle on it because of the high torque to help hold it down. It has an all-metal chuck that is much more robust than the plastic one over here. And it's a bigger unit. It's flat on the back and has a lot of nice ventilation, whereas this has the ventilation out of the back, which was a bit of a problem with that piece of wood back there. This ventilates around the side. What I've got here then is the drill tool, and I'll show you how this gets used, but basically you slide the end of your leaf in this little slot right here, mount your drill in here with the bit pointing up, and then use this assembly and a socket wrench to tighten this bolt, which pushes the drill up from the bottom. This is a little block I added. It comes with sort of a U shape here. Probably good if you're going to have a circular shaped back of the drill, but this one is flat. So I have a piece of oak here that I had some leftover trim from a house project. I cut it in a nice little bevel here. You could probably just cut it in a straight direction, it would be fine. And then I used some aluminized duct tape here just to hold it in place so I wouldn't have to be messing with it falling out as I was trying to position this. So I did one test hole. Of course, I have two, or had two, and then a little bit of another one to finish up, and it went pretty well. This is the last full hole I have to drill, and it turns out this exhaust pipe here is runs right underneath where the drill tool would mount. There's a hanger up in here for the exhaust pipe. I had to take that off, and once I was able to loosen up the pipe, I was able to take a strap, tie it over here to pull that out of the way. We have the overload leaf spring here. It's the bottom spring, and it's tapered on the end. That makes it a little more challenging. But there are a couple of bolts you put through this drill holder, and those go on top of the support. Use some washers to help get an even space on this. And then there's a drill bit guide underneath that. And then you have the whole tool and underneath that is the support for the drill itself. I'll put the drill in a moment so you can see it. So the drill is in the mount now. You can see the wood block I put in there in the back of this drill support, push against the back of the drill, and then use this bolt to be able to drive the drill up into the spring. It takes a lot of force to dig into this high strength steel here, and slow speeds, high force, and a lot of torque from the drill, as I learned the hard way. So I'm going to start drilling. I recommend hearing protection here. The drill itself isn't that loud, but I found it gets kind of chattery, and that can be kind of noisy, certainly into the ear damage realm. So the other thing I would recommend is wearing some gloves. I'll do that. I'm going to be using these leather palm gloves, and that's primarily because you're going to get a lot of chips, drill chips, out of this, and they are hot, and they'll want to fall down on your hand. If you don't have something on it to protect them, it will not feel good. Well, things just keep getting better. I had switched to the new sharp bit, and it went in quite well. And then at the very end, of course, when it broke through, it grabbed and spun. I held on to the drill. That's a lot of torque in that drill, but it managed to break the drill bit. So this will be interesting. Took a little provoking to get it out of the hole. It was wedged in there pretty good. In the end, I was able to smack it with a little bit of a cold chisel and break it loose, and then a couple pieces stuck up in the hole. Had to take a center punch and just tap up in there, and they came out. I have managed to finally drill all 4 holes. I guess if you add it up, I bet you it's like 2 hours per hole, which is pretty pathetic. So we've got 1 hole on the front of each overload leaf spring, and 1 hole in the back. Some lessons learned in drilling these holes. The first one is use their tool. That thing works so much better than trying to use a bottle jack or any other way. That thing, it's not without its own quirks, but it in the end, it did really did a decent job and was able to get the job done where I was not able to do it otherwise. Number 2, use a drill that has a decent amount of torque and that can take the heat. So the first drill I had, I think, was 480 inch-pounds of torque. The second drill I bought, has well over 1,200, so nearly 3 times the amount of torque. It's bigger, beefier. It got a little warm, but it did not get hot like the first drill did. So the second thing is the instructions say that you drill until you almost break through, but don't quite break through. And then when you're done, when you're ready to break through, use a lighter pressure. And I failed to appreciate just how light of a pressure you needed to use. So I broke the first drill, I broke the second drill, and being a little heavy-handed there, even though I thought I was being lighter than I was before, I thought it took a fair amount of pressure to actually do any cutting on the steel. What I finally did was I backed it way off on the pressure, got the drill going, and basically just slowly tightened it up. If it started to bog down significantly at all, I backed up and just worked my way through. And the next thing I knew, I was broken through and the hole was there. So that was the technique I ended up having to use. Yeah, painful. Maybe those springs are stiffer and harder than others. Maybe I'm just not that good at this. That's entirely possible. So, but I got them all in, and the holes are done. Now it's time to actually put the Stableloads in place, and fingers crossed that goes much better. Yeah, we'll see. I have assembled a couple of these load packs, or wedge packs they call them, and I'll show you how the pieces look when they're put together. It can be a little confusing because there's a lot of holes in these things that are kind of the same size. The drawings in the manual do a pretty good job though, so I'm not going to go into too much depth, but the gist of it is you have this large plate, which is the mounting plate. This will bolt to the overload leaf and basically sit rigidly in place with the overload leaf sitting right in here. The bolt will go through here into the holes that I just drilled into the leaf spring itself. This would be the disengaged position, so you can imagine a leaf spring coming through here, and there's a pivot bolt here. This is what the wedges pivot on. And it's held in place with a bolt and a lock nut. These are all the nylon insert lock nuts on here. This is the area. Got the little hole there that I drilled, that I labored for, sweated over, and cussed at, but finally did get drilled in there. This is the bolt that has to go in, so it has to drop in right here. And as you can see, there's not enough room. Can't even put it in at an angle, so I have to take a pry bar and spread that apart. Make sure it's not going to slip. And there we go. These wedges here, I want those to be inboard of the leaf spring. So it's going to mount up like this so that the wedges can be pivoted into or out of the gap between the overload and the upper leaf. That just pops in there. I do kind of want to check it to make sure that that'll pivot into place, that I've got these spacers right, the number of spacers in are correct. That's it. So when you don't want the Stableloads and the lower overload spring engaged, you pivot these out, and there is a pin that drops down here and holds it in the disengaged position. So yeah, now the pin comes in the top. You have this little clip you can put in there to keep it in place, but then the overload is disengaged and you have the big gap. When you're ready to engage it, which I am now, I've got the camper on, you pivot it in, and there's a different hole that lines up with the same drum. And then again, this pin goes in. They recommend you put it all the way in so it just hangs down. I will show you all of them. They're all engaged right now. There's the front one, and you can see those cables there. I think that's the parking brake cables, and they come down right next to the leaf spring, and so that's why I wasn't able to put the wedge packs on the outboard side, just on the inboard side. And here are the others. There's the front right, and you get a good look at the rear one there on the right hand side. And again, those are all engaged. So I just took the truck for a ride and had to let some air out of the rear airbags, which is a good thing. But I did notice a big improvement in the bounciness. When I would go over at an angle on some of these gullies, rain gullies in the road and such, used to really get thrown around. It's not gone completely, but boy, it's a lot better. And it definitely is riding with less bounce. So I think that was a success. I'm gonna do a little more test drive and get it adjusted, and we'll kind of give a final report when that's all done. The TorkLift lower Stableloads have been installed for a few months now, and I've had a chance to use them up in trips in the Rocky Mountains. I have been very impressed with how much this product has improved the ride and control of this truck with the camper on it. There is much less bounce, much less rolling. I feel much more in control on the mountain roads. I think the combination of the Stableloads, the airbags, and the anti-sway bar really work together to make a nice combination for this truck. I also have to thank TorkLift for sending me the drill tool. It made this project doable for me. It really worked well when I got it dialed in. They did this at no charge, even for the shipping. I paid for these products myself. They had no idea I was making a video about this, but they sent it out. It took a little while to get it because they've only got so many tools and they were out on loan, so they had to get one back in. That was not a problem for me. I used the tool. They did take a credit card number from me as a deposit, but I returned the tool promptly with no damage, so they didn't make any type of a charge to the credit card. While I struggled drilling the holes, I'm happy I did this project, and now that you've learned from my mistakes and struggles, I'm sure you'll have a much better experience if you decide to install these on your rig, even if you decide to drill the holes for yourself. So that's it for this project. Look for more in the future. Take care, and we hope to see you out there soon.